Picture a world where the thermostat reads 20, 30, or even 50 degrees below zero. A world where the wind does not blow, but slices, cutting through every layer of clothing and seeking the heat at your core. For the countless tribes that called North America home, this was the relentless reality of winter. Yet, they did not just endure the cold. They engineered survival. They created homes that were not merely barriers against the elements, but sophisticated marvels of insulation, ventilation, and thermal physics, structures so perfectly attuned to their specific environments that they often outperformed the drafty, resource-intensive log cabins of later settlers. Their shelter was their first and most vital medicine, a sacred space where the life-giving fire was protected and the human spirit found refuge. Tonight, we embark on a journey into the architectural genius of Native Americans, from the windswept Great Plains to the ice-locked Arctic, uncovering the secrets of the teepee, the hogan, the wigwam, and the igloo. We will explore the materials, the geometry, and the ancestral knowledge that turned simple hides, saplings, and packed snow into impregnable fortresses against the deadly breath of the north wind. And we begin with the most enduring symbol of frontier life, the conical genius of the plains, the windswept citadel, the teepee. The teepee, iconic to the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains like the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Blackfoot, was far more than a simple tent. It was a portable, double-walled home engineered for a landscape defined by extreme weather, sudden, violent storms, and temperatures that plunged into the lethal range. The sheer ingenuity lay not in its individual components, but in how those components interacted to create a self-regulating thermal machine, the geometry of resilience, conical perfection. The teepee's unmistakable conical shape was its primary defense. Unlike a flat-roofed structure that would bear the full weight of snow and offer a broad, blunt face to the wind, the cone was a fluid master of deflection. When the winter gales howled across the open prairie, the wind simply slid up and around the steeply sloped walls, greatly reducing the structural stress. Furthermore, this geometry ensured that snow accumulation was minimized. Flakes and drifts simply slid down the hides, keeping the structural integrity intact and preventing the heavy insulating outer layer from becoming saturated with moisture. This was architecture designed not to resist the wind but to dance with it, minimizing friction and maximizing stability on ground that could be frozen solid. The materials of life, buffalo hide and lodgepole pine, the covering of the winter teepee, was the heart of its insulation. Forget the canvas models of later years. The authentic winter lodge was a tapestry woven from the thick, durable hides of the buffalo. It took between 10 and 20 massive buffalo hides, meticulously tanned, scraped thin, and stitched together with sinew to form the outer shell. The women, the architects and engineers of the lodge, ensured these hides were often treated, sometimes with a solution of brains and fat, sometimes lightly smoked to make them supple, waterproof, and immensely durable. This heavy, multi-layered animal hide was an unmatched insulator, naturally windproof and capable of trapping vast amounts of heat. The framework, typically constructed from 20 or more long, straight lodgepole pine poles, provided a rigid skeleton that was both lightweight for transport and incredibly strong against lateral wind forces. The entire structure was a zero-waste masterpiece. Every piece came from the earth, and every piece served multiple, life-sustaining functions. The double-walled secret, the inner liner system. The true genius of the teepee's winter design lay in its invisible double-wall system. Inside the outer buffalo hide shell, a second, shorter wall, the inner liner, or dew cloth, was installed. This liner, often made of lighter hides or woven mats, extended from the ground up to the height of a person, creating a continuous, sealed space around the sleeping area. The critical feature of this system was the air gap it created between the inner and outer walls. This trapped air, warmed by the rising heat of the central fire, acted precisely like the fiberglass insulation in a modern house. It formed an insulating buffer zone, preventing the inner warmth from transferring directly to the freezing outer hides. This simple pocket of air was one of the most effective thermal defenses devised by man, the engine of warmth. The living chimney effect, the double wall system, worked in perfect synchronicity with the central fire and the adjustable smoke flaps at the apex. The outer hide stopped short of the ground, leaving a small, narrow gap or cuff at the base. This gap was not a flaw, it was the intake vent. Fresh, cold air entered at the base, but rather than sweeping across the floor and chilling the occupants, it was immediately drawn into the air gap between the two walls. As the air moved upward past the central fire, it was pre-warmed, feeding the fire with a clean supply of oxygen while preventing drafts in the sleeping area. Simultaneously, the fire's smoke was drawn powerfully upward and out through the smoke flaps, controlled by two external poles. By angling the flaps into the wind, the Lakota created a natural draft, generating a clean, outward current. This ingenious system ensured that even in the deepest blizzard, the teepee remained warm, cozy, and, most critically, smoke-free. The entire structure, from base to apex, functioned as a self-regulating chimney, turning the dangerous elements of fire and wind into a life-giving, controlled thermal cycle, the earthen cradle, the Hogan, moving southwest to the arid, high desert canyons and mesas of the Navajo. The challenge shifted from relentless wind to extreme, stable temperatures and intense ground cold. The solution was the Hogan, or Hogan, a structure that rejected portability for the profound power of thermal mass. The Hogan was not a temporary shelter. It was a permanent, rooted, and sacred extension of the earth itself. The geometry of the sacred. Stability and alignment. Traditional Winter Hogans were constructed in a hexagonal or octagonal shape, built low to the ground. This geometry provided immense structural stability against the region's strong, sudden winds. The door of the Hogan was nearly always faced east, a non-negotiable spiritual and practical alignment. Spiritually, it welcomed the light of the rising sun, Hoju, or balance, and the first light of day. Practically, the thick east-facing walls would absorb the warmth of the low winter morning sun, storing that solar energy for slow release throughout the day and into the night. The materials of stability, logs and packed earth. The Hogan's ingenuity lay in its heavy, dense materials, acting as a massive thermal battery. The frame was constructed from interlocking logs or stone, creating a sturdy inner skeleton. This structure was then almost completely covered in thick layers of packed earth and mud. These walls, sometimes several feet thick, possessed the principle of thermal mass. They were slow to heat and slow to cool. During the desert winter day, the earth absorbed the sun's warmth. During the night, as temperatures plummeted outside, the thick walls slowly radiated that stored heat back into the interior. The fire's deep heart, retention and control, unlike the plains teepee, which relied on continuous airflow, the Hogan aimed to trap and hold heat with minimal leakage. The fire pit, often a shallow depression lined with stone in the center, was managed with extreme efficiency. A small, carefully tended fire, fueled by pinon or juniper wood, was often sufficient to warm the dense walls. Once the fire burned down to coals, the structure would retain the residual heat for hours, often requiring only minor maintenance during the night. The minimal windows, or the use of heavy hide flaps over the doorway, ensured drafts were virtually non-existent. The Hogan was an architectural metaphor for endurance, heavy, quiet, and profoundly connected to the enduring spirit of the earth itself. The forest cocoon, the wigwam. In the dense, snow-laden forests of the Northeast, home to tribes like the Algonquin, the Iroquois, and the Ojibwe, survival required a different shelter, adapted to heavy snow load, abundant trees, and high moisture. Their answer was the wigwam, a dome-shaped or sometimes conical structure that married structural flexibility with the ultimate waterproof material. Birch bark, the geometry of the dome, snow load, and flexibility. The dome-shaped wigwam was built on a skeleton of bent saplings, usually birch, cedar, or willow, lashed together at the apex with strong spruce roots or rawhide. This flexible, curved framework was perfect for shedding heavy, wet snowfall. The dome's inherent strength resisted the crushing weight of snow better than a flat roof, and the supple saplings could flex slightly under duress, preventing catastrophic collapse. This was a semi-permanent home, designed to be disassembled and moved, but robust enough to withstand a full winter season in place. The waterproof skin, layered birch bark, the true miracle material of the wigwam, was the birch bark covering. Harvested in large pliable sheets during the spring or early summer, the bark was an incredible natural insulator and waterproof barrier. The bark was carefully layered over the sapling frame, much like shingles on a modern roof, with the smooth waterproof side facing out. This layering ensured that melting snow or freezing rain could not penetrate the inner dwelling. The double defense, mats and snow banking. For winter, the wigwam utilized a multi-layered insulation strategy. The interior was often lined with woven cattail or reed mats and heavy hides. These organic mats trapped air and provided a soft additional layer of insulation against the cold penetrating the birch bark. Externally, the wigwam practiced snow banking. As snow accumulated, it was deliberately packed around the base and lower half of the dome. Snow, being mostly trapped air, is a superb insulator, and this deliberate banking created a massive thermal shield, locking in the warmth generated by the low-slung central fire pit and sealing the structure against ground drafts. The wigwam was a testament to using natural flexibility and local resources to create a warm, dry refuge in a wet, heavy snow environment. The icy incubator, the igloo, the Inuit's igloo or igloo, used across the Arctic landscape, represents the pinnacle of environmental mastery, turning the most hostile material, ice and snow, into the warmest possible shelter. This was architecture designed for a world where wood was non-existent and survival depended on utilizing the environment's only abundant resource. The geometry of necessity, the spiral dome, the igloo's perfect dome shape was constructed from precisely cut blocks of compacted, dense snow. The blocks were laid in a continuous spiral, leaning inward, until the capstone sealed the apex. This precise geometry required no internal support. The structure was held up by the simple compressive strength of the arch, making it immensely strong against the high-force winds of the tundra. The insulating power of air. Snow as fiberglass, the genius of the igloo lay in its understanding of snow. Snow is not cold, it is trapped air. The frozen crystals create countless pockets of air, making the snow blocks an exceptional insulator, far better than wood or thin hide. The interior temperature of a well-maintained igloo could hover around 32 degrees or slightly higher, even when the outside temperature was 50 degrees, 45 degrees. The small, low-burning kudlik, a seal oil lamp fueled by animal fat, provided just enough supplemental heat to warm the interior without melting the structure. The outer layer of the snow would melt and refreeze, creating an impervious, ice-hard shell, while the inner snow remained soft and insulating. The thermal strategy. The low tunnel entrance. The most critical feature was the low tunnel entrance. This tunnel was necessary because warm air rises. By making the entry below the main floor level, the Inuit created a massive cold sink. Any heavy, cold air entering the structure would immediately sink into the lower tunnel, while the lighter, warmer air generated by the seal oil lamp and the inhabitants' bodies remained trapped above, constantly hovering over the sleeping platform. The sleeping platform itself was raised, insulated by a thick layer of caribou furs, further isolating the occupants from the igloo's floor. The igloo was a thermal trap, a quiet, stable incubator where human life could thrive in the most unforgiving environment on Earth. The subterranean retreat, earth lodges, and pit houses. Not all ingenious winter shelters rose above the ground. For tribes that maintained semi-permanent agricultural villages, particularly along the Missouri River, like the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara, or in parts of the Southwest, the ultimate protection was found by retreating into the earth itself. The Mandan Earth Lodge, The massive winter village. The Mandan Earth Lodge was a large, stable community structure designed to house multiple families and their stores of food through the plains winter. Built on a sturdy circular framework of timbers, the entire structure was covered by layers of brush grass and a final massive coating of packed earth. Much like the Hogan, this layer of earth provided monumental thermal mass. These subterranean or semi-subterranean lodges maintained an incredibly stable temperature. Once warmed by the central fire, the earth roof and walls would radiate heat steadily, often lasting for days after the fire died down. The Earth Lodge was the communal answer to cold, massive, stable, and deeply rooted in the ground, a village-sized fortress against the blizzards. The Pit House, Anasazi, Hopi. Digging for stability in the ancient Southwest, the Pit House offered a solution to the variable temperatures. Dug several feet into the ground, the floor of the shelter was naturally insulated by the Earth's mass. The walls were often lined with stone or logs, and a light roof was constructed over the top. This simple act of digging provided immediate significant geothermal stability. The earth beneath the frost line maintains a constant temperature, around 50-60 degrees Celsius in many regions. By dropping the living space into this geothermal zone, the inhabitants instantly minimized heat loss and achieved a stable, manageable internal temperature, proving that sometimes the most ingenious shelter is simply the hole you dig. The universal engineering, breaking the cold chain. Regardless of the shelter's outer form hide cone, earth dome, or snow spiral, every Native American tribe faced one absolute, relentless enemy, the frozen ground. The earth is a massive heat sink, and a body lying directly on it will lose heat faster than it can be generated, making even a raging fire useless. The solution was a universal principle of engineering that we call breaking the cold chain, creating a series of layers to isolate the sleeper from the lethal cold below. Layer 1, the packed snow base. It began not with materials but with action. The snow inside the shelter's footprint was meticulously trampled and packed down hard. Packed snow, being denser than fresh snow, is a better insulator than bare frozen earth. It served as the first thermal break and also prevented early meltwater from seeping up into the bedding. Layer 2, the raised platform, willow wood. Over the packed snow, tribes laid down woven willow mats, plains northeast, or a platform of saplings or small logs. This layer was critical, creating a small airspace, even a few inches, between the ground and the next layer. This trapped pocket of air was the essential second thermal break, preventing conduction from pulling heat upward. Layer 3, the fluffed insulator, grass, reeds. On top of the mats came the bulk insulation, thick, deep layers of dried prairie grass, cattail fluff, or reeds, all harvested and stored in abundance during the warmer months. These materials were carefully fluffed to maximize the amount of trapped air. This organic mattress was the primary insulation layer, minimizing heat transfer. Layer 4, the barrier and cradle, hides, furs. Finally, the sleeping surface itself was laid, thick buffalo hides, fur side up, or layers of softer furs, elk, deer, beaver. The fur side cradled the sleeper in a soft, heat-trapping layer, while the smooth leather underside provided a final barrier against moisture rising from the grasses below. This four-layered system was a masterpiece of thermal dynamics, turning the unforgiving ground into a warm, dry nest. It was maintained daily, furs were aired out, grasses fluffed, and the entire platform checked for dampness. The final touch, ingenious tools and maintenance. The longevity and effectiveness of these shelters depended entirely on meticulous maintenance, requiring specialized tools and a profound understanding of natural adhesives. The architect's tools, bone and sinew. The erection and maintenance of the teepee relied on bone awls and sinew thread. The strong, non-stretching sinew thread made from dried animal tendons was used to stitch the heavy buffalo hides together, creating seams that could withstand years of stress and weather. The bone awl was used to punch the stitching holes, In the Northeast, spruce roots were often used as lashing material for the wigwam frame, chosen for their immense strength and flexibility, even in cold weather. Sealing the gaps. Natural pitch and tallow shelter is perfect without a tight seal. In the Northeast, pine pitch, pine sap, melted and mixed with fat, was used as a natural caulk, sealing the joints and seams of the birch bark sheets on the wigwam, ensuring absolute waterproofing. On the plains, buffalo tallow was sometimes used to condition the hides and seal minor tiers, maintaining the wind-proof integrity of the teepee walls. The snow tool kit. The Arctic and Plains tribes developed essential tools for managing the massive snowfall. The Inuit used a specialized bone knife or antler chisel to cut the precise blocks of snow for the igloo. Plains and Northeast. Tribes sometimes used the scapula, shoulder, blessed of a moose or buffalo as a natural snow shovel, perfect for clearing paths, banking snow around the shelter, or digging out a trapped entrance. This combination of engineering, material science, and daily maintenance ensured that every shelter, whether a temporary hide cone or a permanent earthen dome, was a continuously optimized machine for survival. The ingenuity of Native American shelter was not found in a single structure, but in the universal principles they perfected: holistic design, thermal mastery, and profound respect for the resources the earth offered. Their homes were and remain a timeless blueprint for living in resilient harmony with the world. The cultural insulation, shelter as spiritual medicine. Beyond thermal and structural integrity, the indigenous winter shelter was a vital piece of spiritual and social medicine, providing a form of cultural insulation that was just as critical as the hides and earth. This cultural layer was the final defense against the despair and fragmentation that cold and isolation could inflict, the microcosm of the universe. For many tribes, the shelter was designed to be a physical representation of the cosmos. The teepee's conical shape, with the floor representing the earth and the poles reaching up to the smoke hole, represented the path to the stars and the Great Spirit, Wakantanka. Sitting inside, the family was symbolically positioned at the center of the universe. This alignment, often marked by the North Star visible through the smoke hole, provided immense psychological stability and a profound sense of belonging to a larger, sacred order. This spiritual orientation was a daily antidote to the chaotic, existential fear of the cold. Shelter as the keeper of memory, the storytelling hub. Winter was the season of confinement and, therefore, the primary time for cultural transmission. The shelter transformed nightly into a university of memory. Elders used the time around the glowing fire to tell the complex narratives of the tribe, creation myths, heroic hunts, and moral fables. The walls of the wigwam or hogan, though silent, were the repository of these stories. The shelter was the designated safe space where children and young adults internalized the essential knowledge required for cultural and practical survival, cementing the bonds of kinship through shared laughter, fear, and wonder. The stories themselves were a type of shared emotional shelter, keeping minds engaged and spirits high when the body was restricted. The healing circle, communal warmth. The interior arrangement of these shelters actively reinforced community health. The communal sleeping circle in the teepee, with the most vulnerable, children and elders, placed in the center, was not just a practical heat-sharing strategy. It was a profound social statement. It meant that every member was protected by the collective body heat and vigilance of the whole. The arrangement demonstrated that no individual survival was separate from the tribes. Similarly, the open single-room design of the hogan or wigwam fostered constant, low-level interaction, preventing the isolation that could lead to sickness or mental fatigue. The lack of private rooms ensured constant, low-level vigilance and immediate responsiveness to the needs of any family member. This cultural layer ensured that the shelters did more than simply protect bodies from the cold. They protected the integrity, history, and spirit of the entire people, turning a practical structure into a powerful, living piece of cultural armor, the medicine of motion, portable shelter, and endurance. The portability of structures like the teepee and the agility of its materials were, paradoxically, a major component of the winter survival strategy, allowing the people to chase resources and avoid the ultimate danger: stagnation. The quick move, mobility as resource management. A key danger of a fixed winter camp was the depletion of local resources, specifically firewood and game. If the firewood within easy fetching distance was exhausted, or if the buffalo herds moved due to deep snow, the camp had to follow. The teepee's design allowed for this necessary mobility. The lodgepole pines served as the framework in one location and as the travois poles for transport to the next. The entire hide covering, though heavy, could be disassembled, rolled, and loaded onto the travois, drag sled pulled by horses or dogs, in under an hour. This architectural adaptability meant the people could swiftly relocate to an area where wood was abundant, or the buffalo were grazing, preventing the scarcity that could lead to starvation or freezing. Mobility was therefore the highest form of resource management. The temporary shelter, emergency life rafts hunters, scouts and travelers often found themselves miles from the main camp when a sudden blizzard struck. Their knowledge of shelter design allowed them to rapidly construct a temporary, life-saving refuge, the snow cave Quincy, Inuit northern tribes. Using the dense, compacted snow, a small cave could be dug or a mound piled and hollowed out. The principles were the same as the igloo, using trapped air insulation and the Earth's stable temperature to create a quick, low-maintenance shelter that could withstand high winds. The brush wickiup, Apache, other mobile tribes, a quick conical frame of brushwood and branches, covered rapidly with pine boughs and packed snow, offered enough windbreak and insulation for a single night of survival. The fire was often built outside, but the wind was broken, providing the essential temperature gain needed to survive. These emergency shelters were the ultimate testament to their mastery of architecture, a knowledge so ingrained that it could be recreated in moments of absolute necessity, turning a desperate situation into a manageable night of survival. The maintenance cycle, sustaining the fortress. The durability of these indigenous shelters through decades of use was not accidental. It was the result of a rigorous, continuous maintenance cycle, a set of daily and seasonal tasks that ensured the shelter's thermal envelope never failed. The daily hide check, plains. The women of the plains meticulously checked the teepee hides every morning. The constant temperature fluctuation, the wind abrasion, and the risk of sparks from the fire meant the hides could tear or dry out. Sinew repair. Tears were immediately mended using the strong sinew thread, ensuring the windproof barrier remained intact. Drying and repositioning. Hides were occasionally untied and repositioned to ensure they wore evenly, and, critically, were thoroughly dried by the sun or by being hung near the fire. A wet hide quickly loses its insulating value and adds massive freezing weight to the structure. The seasonal earth check, Southwest Missouri River. The Hogans and earth lodges required seasonal replenishment of their thermal mass. In the late fall, before the ground froze, families would carry buckets of mud and packed earth to repair any cracks in the walls or the roof, essentially giving their home a fresh coat of insulation. This deliberate communal labor prevented drafts and maintained the integrity of the thermal battery, ensuring the massive structure was ready to absorb the winter's chill. The bark ceiling, northeast. The wigwams were checked for any lifting or cracking of the birch bark shingles. The high moisture of the northeast meant that water damage was a constant threat. Seams were repaired with fresh pine pitch sealant, and any damaged bark sheets were carefully replaced, securing the waterproof barrier that kept the inner woven mats and sleeping furs dry. This continuous cycle of inspection, repair, and maintenance was a critical survival skill. The Native American understood that their shelter was not static. It was a living structure that demanded constant engagement, a partnership where the people gave care, and the shelter returned life. The material science of temperature control. The choice of materials was driven by a deep intuitive knowledge of material science, focusing on properties that minimized heat loss and maximized moisture control. a practical application of physics, the insulating power of fur and hair. The buffalo hide was used not just for its thickness, but for the insulating power of the fur and hair trapped within its layers. The long, dense fibers of the buffalo coat, especially the softer undercoat, created millions of tiny air pockets. When the hide was laid fur side up, as in bedding, the body heat radiated into these pockets, and the air trapped within acted as a micro-insulator, preventing heat from escaping. When the hide was used for clothing or the outer wall of the teepee, the same principle applied. The hair minimized direct contact and slowed the convection of heat away from the core. Birch bark's unique density. Birch bark was chosen for the wigwam not just because it was waterproof, but because it was lightweight yet dense. It provided an excellent, smooth surface to shed water while adding minimal weight to the flexible sapling frame, a perfect balance of lightness, strength, and moisture protection essential for a snow-heavy environment. The breathability of earth. The thick earth of the hogan was ideal because, while it provided massive thermal mass, it also had a level of natural breathability. The structure was not completely airtight, which allowed for a slow, healthy exchange of air that prevented the dangerous buildup of moisture and carbon dioxide, a fatal flaw in poorly ventilated shelters. The earth was a dynamic living material, balancing stability with health. This profound understanding of natural material properties was the non-verbal science that underpinned their entire winter survival strategy, proving that ingenuity often lies in perfecting the use of what the environment already provides. The legacy of sustainable shelter, the most enduring quality of the ingenious winter shelters of Native Americans is their complete sustainability and their profound connection to the Earth's cycles. These shelters stand as a timeless model of how human ingenuity can meet extreme environmental challenges without exploiting or permanently damaging the natural world. Renewable resources. Every material used, buffalo hides, lodgepole, pines, birch bark, saplings, earth, snow, was a renewable or naturally abundant local resource. The hunter's skill ensured the buffalo population remained healthy. The selective use of saplings and bark ensured the forest regenerated. The materials were biodegradable, ensuring that when the people moved, the camp could be broken down, and the land would quickly reclaim the organic material. This was temporary human habitation that respected the long-term health of the ecosystem. Efficiency over excess. The structures prioritized efficiency over size or complexity. The double-walled teepee used a simple air gap instead of massive quantities of wood. The hogan used the earth's mass instead of a constantly burning, resource-intensive fire. The igloo used snow itself, eliminating the need for any other material. This focus on maximizing thermal return with minimal resource input is the ultimate lesson in sustainable, non-extractive living. Shelter as a teacher. Ultimately, the winter shelter was a teacher, instilling the necessary discipline and wisdom for survival. The maintenance cycle taught responsibility. The communal warmth taught solidarity. The spiritual alignment taught respect. These architectural masterpieces, born of ice and wind, were the foundation upon which the culture of resilience was built, ensuring that the wisdom of the ancestors would survive every blizzard, every plague, and every period of scarcity. They were and remain perfect homes for a people living in profound, resilient harmony with the earth, the engineering of the entrance, doors, flaps, and tunnels. The entry point of any winter shelter is its greatest thermal vulnerability, where precious heat can escape and the lethal cold can rush in. Native American ingenuity focused intensely on engineering the entrance to minimize this risk, creating specialized doors, flaps, and tunnels that acted as final thermal locks. The teepee door flap, hide and pole weight. The teepee's door was a simple, heavy flap of buffalo hide, often weighted at the bottom with a small pole or stones. This weight ensured the hide hung straight and quickly sealed the gap after a person passed through, preventing the door from flapping open in the wind. The entryway was also strategically small and low, forcing the person to duck. This low opening was a physical barrier against the cold air which, being heavy, stayed low to the ground. By forcing the person to duck, the height of the opening was minimized, conserving the maximum amount of warm air inside. The flap was often mounted to open inward, which allowed snow to be banked up against the outside edge without blocking the ability to enter or exit. The Hogan and Wigwam door shields. The Hogan, with its east-facing door, used a similar but heavier principle. The solid wooden or log frame of the doorway was sealed with heavy hide or woven mats. The thickness of the earth walls provided a natural vestibule effect. In a stationary wigwam, the entrance was often covered with layers of overlapping woven mats or bark panels, creating a thick, flexible shield against drafts. Some larger, longhouse-style wigwams even incorporated a small, dedicated entry room or vestibule, a separate cold air buffer zone, before the main heated dwelling space. The igloo's cold trap tunnel. The most dramatic example was the igloo's long, low tunnel. This tunnel, sometimes several feet long and requiring the person to crawl to enter, was a deliberate cold trap. As the occupant entered, the cold air they brought in was forced to sink into the tunnel floor, while their body heat remained trapped in the upper living dome. The tunnel ensured that the cold air mass remained outside or beneath the main shelter space, providing the ultimate thermal security for the inhabitants. This crawl space was not an inconvenience. It was a life-saving thermal necessity. The non-structural aids internal support and organization. The integrity of the winter shelter was also sustained by non-structural elements that managed the internal environment, focusing on cleanliness and organization, a form of preventative thermal maintenance. The lodge tripod and storage. Inside the conical teepee, a small central tripod of poles was often erected. This was not structural, but served as the primary storage and drying rack. Wet mittens, moccasin liners, or partially frozen meat could be hung high above the fire, using the rising heat to dry the essential materials. This kept dampness off the insulating floor and ensured that key gear was dry and warm for the next day's use. In a winter environment, a dry moccasin liner was a medical necessity, and this simple tripod was the tool that ensured it. The fire pit perimeter. The area immediately surrounding the central fire pit was often lined with stones or a low curb of earth. This ring served two purposes: safety, preventing sparks from reaching the hide walls or the dry bedding, and radiant heat storage. The stones would absorb the fire's heat and slowly radiate it outward into the lodge, extending the thermal benefit of the fire even after the flames died down. Internal partitions, privacy, and heat zoning. In larger family or communal lodges like the Earth Lodge or large teepees, temporary internal partitions were often hung. These partitions, made of woven mats or light hides, separated sleeping areas and created microzones of warmth. By sectioning off space, the occupants could concentrate their body heat, creating a smaller, more easily warmed private space within the larger structure. Practical adjustment for intimacy and individualized heat conservation. These internal aids show that the shelter was a meticulously managed environment, where every tool, stone, and hanging hide served a dual purpose: organization for the mind and thermal. Efficiency for the body, the unseen architect, the role of women in shelter engineering, the greatest engineering expertise in Native American winter. Survival lay in the hands of the women. Across nearly all tribes, women were the primary architects, constructors, and maintainers of the family dwelling. Their deep knowledge was the intellectual property that ensured the shelters were functionally perfect. Hide processing and standardization. On the plains, women mastered the complex, months-long process of tanning buffalo hides to the precise specifications required for a teepee. They knew how to scrape the hide thin enough for flexibility, but thick enough for insulation. They knew the precise tension of the sinew stitching needed to prevent tearing in high winds. Crucially, they standardized the cut of the hides so that damaged sections could be replaced without having to replace the entire outer covering. A sophisticated system of modular repair, botanical structure, and lashing. In the Northeast, Women were the experts in botanical engineering. They knew which saplings to select, flexible willow for the frame, rigid cedar for the roof, when to harvest them, and how to bend and lash them with spruce roots to create the perfect tension for the dome shape. The integrity of the wigwam rested entirely on their knowledge of botanical properties and their skill in creating the waterproof, shingle-like layers of birch bark, the steward of thermal balance. In every shelter, the woman was the ultimate steward of the thermal balance. She knew where to place the bedding to avoid drafts, how much grass was needed for insulation, and how to manage the smoke flaps to prevent the dangerous buildup of smoke or the entry of snow. Her expertise transcended construction. It was a daily intuitive management of the life-giving microclimate within the walls. The strength of Native American winter survival was built upon this intellectual and practical foundation, recognition that the most sophisticated science is often the knowledge passed from woman to woman, generation after generation, ensuring the life and comfort of the entire family. The art of layering, the roof, the walls, and the floor. The mastery of layering was the final, non-negotiable principle, applied not just to clothing and bedding, but to every surface of the shelter, transforming a simple wall into a composite thermal barrier. Layering the teepee wall, outer layer, hide. The first defense, shedding wind and moisture and providing structural integrity, air gap trap. The critical layer of trapped air between the outer hide and the inner liner, inner layer liner. A final shield to stop cold air from directly touching the occupants, airspace, inner. The warm, breathable air within the living space itself. This four-stage system ensured that cold transfer was slowed at multiple stages, making the wall incredibly efficient. Layering the wigwam roof, sapling frame, the flexible, load-bearing structure. Birch bark shingles, the primary waterproof and windproof barrier. Woven mat liner, the inner insulation layer, trapping air and adding an additional warm barrier. Layering the earth lodge, hogan. Roof timber frame, the heavy structural support, brush and grass. An organic layer to hold the earth and provide light initial insulation, packed earth, mud. The massive thermal battery, providing stability and immense insulation. This commitment to compound layering, building a barrier not of one material, but of a balanced system of materials and trapped air, is the architectural signature of Native American winter genius. It ensured that no matter the location, the interior of the shelter was always a carefully controlled, warm, and sustainable environment, perfectly engineered for human life to thrive against the world's most severe cold. The physics of the fire pit and draft control. The central fire was the heart of the winter dwelling, but its existence inside a closed structure presented two immediate dangers: smoke inhalation and fire risk. The Native American solution was a nuanced, daily mastery of thermal physics and draft control, turning the fire into a clean, efficient heat source. The central position and radiant heat. In the teepee and earth lodge, the fire pit was always precisely in the center. This maximized the radiant heat transfer, ensuring the warmth expanded evenly toward all the surrounding walls and occupants. A fire placed against a wall would overheat that single section, while leaving the rest of the dwelling cold, making the uniform central placement a critical element of thermal democracy. The pit itself was shallow, often lined with stones or a clay mixture. The stones absorbed heat and slowly released it back into the space even when the fire was low, acting as a small secondary radiator, managing the fuel, the clean burn. The quality of the fuel was non-negotiable for winter survival. Wet or green wood produced massive, acrid smoke that could suffocate occupants, especially children. Therefore, fuel was strictly dead, dry wood, cottonwood, willow, or juniper, selected for its ability to produce steady, consistent heat with minimal smoke residue. In times of scarcity, dried animal dung, buffalo chips, was used. While it required careful management, it provided a dense, slow-burning heat with surprisingly little offensive smoke, a crucial adaptation on the open prairie where wood was sparse. The precision of the smoke flap, TP detail. The adjustable smoke flaps were the teepee's throttle and steering wheel. Manned by exterior poles, their position was constantly adjusted in response to the wind. Windward adjustment. If the wind was blowing from the north, the flaps were angled to leave a narrow opening facing away from the wind. The wind passing over the top of the cone created a low-pressure area, actively sucking the smoke up and out, enhancing the draft. Still air. In still, calm air, the flaps were opened wide to allow the smoke to rise unimpeded, the flap dance. The act of adjusting the flaps became known as the flap dance, a daily ritual performed by the fire tender, balancing the need for smoke egress with the need to retain heat. The system was so effective that a properly managed teepee, even in a blizzard, remained remarkably smoke-free. This mastery of fire and air demonstrated that the indigenous builder was a sophisticated environmental engineer, understanding that the quality of the air you breathe is as vital as the warmth that sustains you. Beyond the igloo, specialized Arctic shelters. While the igloo is famous, Inuit and other northern tribes utilized a range of specialized shelters that adapted to seasons and resource availability, showing the fluid nature of their architectural genius. The Karmak, semi-permanent winter house. The Karmak was a semi-subterranean, more robust shelter used when a community stayed in one location for a prolonged period. It was built with a foundation of stone or whalebone, where wood was absent, forming a rigid frame. This frame was then covered with skins, sod, or brush. Critically, it was often partially dug into the earth to take advantage of geothermal stability. The Karmak combined the thermal mass of the earth with the insulating value of furs, providing a larger, warmer space than the temporary igloo necessary for complex tasks like drying furs and communal cooking. The Tupik summer transitional tent. For seasonal travel during the transitional periods, the Tupik was utilized, a tent made of lighter seal or caribou hides. While less insulating than the Karmak or igloo, its design was optimized for quick erection and maximum airflow, necessary when hunting required rapid movement, and when the internal temperature of a heavier shelter would quickly become unbearably hot during the late spring. The ability to shift between these three distinct shelter types, igloo, acute survival, Karmak, prolonged settlement, and Tupik, mobility, demonstrated an advanced, adaptive system of architecture based on the annual calendar. The materials processing genius, tanning, weaving, and lashing. The raw effectiveness of every shelter rested on the meticulous processing of natural materials, work that transformed rough animal hides and fragile plants into high performance, durable architectural components. This processing was a science mastered almost entirely by the women of the tribes. The brain tanning miracle, Plains Northeast. To make the buffalo, elk, or deer hide suitable for teepee covers and bedding, they had to be tanned. The most common method was brain tanning, using the animal's own brain matter, emulsified with water and sometimes fat, to process the skin. This natural, labor-intensive process was a marvel of organic chemistry. It produced leather that was incredibly soft, flexible, essential for folding and transport, and crucially remained pliable even in sub-zero temperatures. Untanned rawhide would stiffen and crack in the cold, making it useless. Brain-tanned leather remained supple, making the difference between a functional shelter and a frozen. Brittle trap, birch bark, harvesting, and seaming, Northeast. The gathering and preparation of birch bark required acute seasonal timing. The bark could only be peeled in large, flexible sheets during the spring or early summer when the sap was running. Once peeled, the bark was cured and prepared to lie flat. The subsequent lashing and sealing with spruce root and pine pitch was a highly specialized skill, creating overlapping watertight seams that lasted for years. The ability to create a roof that could shed water and massive snow loads without synthetic sealants was a testament to their deep knowledge of forest resources. Sinew and root lashing. Sinew, animal tendon, was the universal thread, renowned for its incredible strength and non-stretching properties, making it ideal for sewing heavy hides. For structural integrity, especially in the wigwam frame, Spruce root was the equivalent of high tensile rope. These roots were gathered, stripped, and soaked until they were flexible, then used to lash the saplings together. As the root dried, it shrank slightly, pulling the joint into an immensely strong, rigid lock, a perfect structural splice achieved without nails or hardware. The interior life, organization, and comfort. Inside the winter shelter, the organization of space was a form of architectural medicine, maximizing comfort, efficiency, and social cohesion during the months of close quarters. The teepee's social circle and storage. The interior of the teepee was highly organized around the central fire and the bedding circle. The beds, the bedding, mats, furs, robes ringed the perimeter, serving as the social zone, sleeping area, and primary seating. The backrest, made of willow rods lashed together, allowed occupants to sit upright comfortably, preventing slumping that could impede circulation and lead to chills. Storage zones. Personal belongings and extra clothing were stored in parfleche bags or wooden boxes and placed at the head or foot of the beds, serving as boundary markers and preventing clutter that could pose a safety or sanitation risk. The organization was fluid yet rigorous, essential for maintaining sanity and calm in confinement. The Hogans' fixed zones. Navajo. The Hogan, being a permanent structure, had fixed sacred zones. The area directly inside the east door was the working area. The center was the fire pit. The walls often had low shelves or alcoves carved into them for storing ceremonial items or essential tools. The back of the Hogan was often the place of honor, reserved for elders in the most important activities. The fixed nature of the Hogan space provided a stable, comforting routine during the repetitive winter days. The role of light, in the absence of windows, was essential for tasks like beadwork, tanning, and carving. Teepee. The light came primarily from the fire and the smoke hole Hogan Carmack. Small, specialized windows, often sealed with dried, translucent animal membranes like seal intestine, allowed a minimal, diffused light to enter while blocking the wind. Igloo. Light was provided by the kudlik seal oil lamp or by a small, precisely cut pane of clear freshwater ice fitted into the wall, providing a natural light source without compromising the thermal shell. The geometry of human connection. Multi-family shelters. For larger communities, especially those that were semi-sedentary or agricultural, winter survival often meant living in massive communal shelters, an architectural embodiment of collective survival. The Iroquois longhouse, the communal furnace. In the Iroquois Confederacy, the longhouse was the multi-family winter dwelling, a massive, rectangular, barrel-roofed structure, often hundreds of feet long. It was framed with heavy timber and covered with overlapping sheets of elm bark. The interior was divided by internal partitions into family compartments, but the central aisle was communal. Along this central axis ran multiple hearth fires shared by two adjacent families. This created a massive continuous thermal zone. The combined heat from these numerous fires contained within the long insulated structure generated an immense, stable internal warmth that was highly efficient, minimizing heat loss per person. The longhouse was a perfect fusion of individual family comfort with absolute communal reliance. The Pueblo Kiva, the underground community center. In the Southwest, while families lived in their individual homes, the Kiva, a circular, often subterranean ceremonial chamber, served as a critical winter shelter for social and religious life. The Kiva's subterranean nature gave it the same geothermal stability as the Pied House. It was here that men, in particular, would gather during the day for weaving, crafting, political discussions, and ceremony. Its constant, moderate temperature made it an ideal workspace away from the colder family dwellings, fostering communal labor and spiritual unity throughout the winter. The science of snow beyond the igloo. The mastery of snow as a building material extended beyond the igloo, demonstrating a profound, almost scientific understanding of its structural and insulating properties across various latitudes, the snowdrift shield. In plains and northern camps, packed snow fences or windbreaks were deliberately built upwind of the teepees or wigwams. These barriers, often reinforced with brush, served two purposes: wind deflection. They forced the wind upward, creating a pocket of calm. Still air immediately around the shelter. Insulation. They slowed the movement of the storm, allowing the air immediately surrounding the lodge to warm slightly, effectively raising the ambient temperature directly outside the walls. The snow-packed hogan. In the southwest, when the infrequent heavy snow fell, the Navajo would actively pack the snow onto the roof and around the walls of the hogan where the earth was exposed. They understood that this new layer of snow insulation was highly beneficial, adding another layer of thermal mass and further securing the seal of the structure, the structural property of ice. The Inuit often used clear, freshwater ice, cut from frozen lakes, to form small windows in the igloo. They understood that while glass is a poor insulator, a thick block of ice with its density and structural integrity allowed in light while maintaining a superior thermal barrier compared to an equivalent opening of air. This ingenious use of ice as a structural window material highlights their pragmatic genius. The spiritual architecture, honoring the lodge's spirit. The Native American shelter was not merely architecture, it was a recipient of spiritual reverence, believed to have a life and a spirit that provided protection and comfort. Honoring this spirit was a daily act of maintenance. The teepee's altar, Lakota. In many teepees, a small area immediately opposite the entrance was considered a sacred space or altar. This area was meticulously kept clean, often marked by a small pile of earth or stone, and sometimes held a ceremonial pipe or a small pouch of tobacco. Before using the lodge for rest or work, an offering might be made here. This ritual honored the spirit of the dwelling, ensuring its continued protection and the well-being of the family inside. The Hogan's Blessing, Navajo. The construction of the hogan was a multi-day ceremony involving prayers and rituals to ensure its stability and sacred alignment. The blessing way ceremony was often performed inside the finished hogan, dedicating it to the spiritual beings and ensuring that the house was in harmony, hoju, with the landscape. The door facing east was a daily act of ritual, greeting the sun not just for warmth, but for spiritual purification. The wigwam's reciprocity, Algonquin. When a wigwam was abandoned for a season, it was not simply left to decay. An offering might be left inside, and the door left slightly ajar, a gesture of thanks to the forest spirit for the resources it provided. This act of reciprocity ensured that the resources would be abundant when the people returned, and that the spirit of the shelter was at rest. This spiritual connection ensured that the occupants treated their home not as a disposable resource, but as a vital partner in their survival, leading to a level of care and maintenance that directly translated into physical endurance and comfort throughout the harshest winter months. The final measure. Lessons in environmental harmony. The ingenuity of Native American winter shelters offers the modern world a profound lesson in environmental engineering and sustainable living. Their success was never about fighting nature. It was always about understanding it, accommodating it, and leveraging its intrinsic properties. Passive solar design. The east-facing Hogan and Earth Lodge utilized perfect passive solar heating, absorbing thermal energy precisely when the low winter sun was available and releasing it later when the temperature dropped. This eliminated the need for continuous fuel consumption, a masterclass in energy conservation, zero energy insulation. The double-walled teepee and the igloo utilized the principle of trapped air for insulation, an essentially zero-energy solution. They used air pockets, the most available and cheapest insulator, to separate the cold exterior from the warm interior, demonstrating that complexity is not required for perfect thermal efficiency. The fluid structure. The most successful shelters were not static. The teepee was mobile. The wigwam was flexible. The igloo was a fluid, temporary creation that melted back into the landscape. This architectural fluidity reflected a sustainable worldview. The structure adapted to the environment and the people's needs, rather than the environment having to be adapted to the structure. The Native American winter shelter was the perfect synthesis of physics, botany, and spirituality, a true engineering marvel that turned the threat of a fatal cold into an opportunity for communal strength and cultural preservation. The architectural language of the plains. We return to the teepee to explore the aesthetic and highly functional language painted onto its magnificent hide walls, where art became an external summary of the home's spirit and history. The painted narratives, the exterior of the teepee, especially in the winter camps, was often decorated with painted scenes, serving as both art and a historical record. These paintings, applied by women using natural pigments, ochre, charcoal, clay, depicted Wakantanka, the sacred, circles, stars, and celestial beings at the top, symbolizing the connection to the cosmos. The hunt. Successful buffalo hunts or war exploits near the base, documenting the family's history and providing a visual record of their resilience and provision. Protective symbols, thunderbird, bears, or other powerful animal spirits painted at the base, acting as spiritual guards for the dwelling and its occupants. These paintings told the story of the family inside, turning the cold, impersonal hide wall into a warm, immediate record of identity, history, and spiritual protection. The teepee's base, skirt, often a separate strip of hide, the base skirt, was attached around the bottom of the teepee. This strip served to manage snow banking. It created a lip that made it easier to pack snow against the base, ensuring a tight seal against ground drafts. Protect the main hides. It took the brunt of ground moisture and wear and tear, meaning the heavier, more valuable main covering lasted longer. This was a practical layer of sacrificial material, extending the life of the most vital architectural component. The engineering of the Native American winter shelter was, therefore, never just about simple construction. It was about the complex, beautiful, and enduring construction of a stable life, a safe home, and a resilient culture, all built to withstand the deepest cold the continent could offer. The maintenance of the ground, willow and porcupine quills. The intricate relationship with the ground inside the lodge demanded constant, specialized care, particularly concerning moisture management, which was the silent killer of all insulation. Willow mat flexibility. The woven willow mats that formed the base layer were chosen for their natural flexibility. In a prolonged winter, they would occasionally be taken outside, shaken free of trapped debris, and allowed to briefly dry by sun or fire. Their structure meant that even after being compressed by sleeping bodies for months, they would regain their loft when fluffed, restoring the critical airspace between the floor and the bedding. Porcupine quill work as reinforcement. While often used decoratively, porcupine quills were also integrated into functional items that provided structural reinforcement. Quills, when flattened and woven into patterns on moccasins, backrests, or hide bags, provided a robust, water-resistant surface. This added durability to items constantly exposed to wear and moisture within the shelter, making the beautiful quill work an act of functional preservation as much as art. The bedding fluff ritual. Every morning, the grass and reeds used for bulk insulation were aggressively fluffed. Occupants would lift the layer of furs and shake the grass layer to restore the air pockets. This daily ritual was vital. Compacted insulation is useless insulation. The energy put into fluffing the bedding was the energy saved during the subsequent night. A direct energy conservation practice integrated into the daily routine. The sheer volume of knowledge required to sustain this system, knowing which hide to use, which bark to choose, which layer to shake, was staggering. It was a true science, passed down, not through books, but through the patient, dedicated work of survival, making the ingenuity of these shelters an everlasting testament to human resilience and environmental respect. The silent warning, architecture, and the prevention of conflict. A final, subtle function of the Native American winter shelter was its role in mitigating conflict, a form of social architecture vital for preventing communal breakdown during periods of extreme confinement. Faig, open space for shared activity. The single, open room design of the teepee and hogan, in contrast to structures with many small, separated rooms, forced shared activity and constant social exposure. While potentially stressful, it prevented the formation of isolated groups or secretive activity, making all issues immediately visible to the community elders. This transparency acted as a pressure release valve, ensuring that minor tensions did not escalate in secret. The defined zones of honor. The highly defined social zones, the elder's place, the storage area, the sacred altar, provided a clear map of social hierarchy and behavior, reducing arguments over space and resources. Everyone knew their place, and this structure provided a comforting, predictable routine that quelled agitation, the teepee's silent vent. The efficient ventilation system of the teepee had a psychological benefit. By removing the smoke and keeping the air clean, it also kept the atmosphere clear of the physical irritation that can lead to emotional volatility. Clean air is calm air, and this physical comfort was essential for maintaining the mental equilibrium of the inhabitants. The ingenious winter shelters of Native Americans were, in the end, about far more than cold. They were a testament to a philosophy that viewed the home as the primary tool for total, holistic survival, a physical, spiritual, and social masterpiece, designed to turn a deadly season into a crucible of enduring life. The legacy of low-tech geothermal, Earth Lodge specifics, the Earth Lodge, a monument to communal plains survival, represents one of the most successful low-tech applications of geothermal engineering, demonstrating an astonishing grasp of climate control, the compression of thermal mass. The immense size of the Mandan, or Hidatsa Earth Lodge, meant that the sheer volume of earth covering its timber frame provided unparalleled thermal inertia. This massive weight of earth ensured that once the interior was heated, the warmth was trapped and could not be quickly stripped away by external winds or plummeting temperatures. The earth, usually packed to a thickness of several feet, essentially turned the lodge into a large human-made cave, leveraging the natural insulating properties of the soil, the smoke hole, and earth seal. Unlike the teepee's adjustable smoke flaps, the Earth Lodge's smoke hole, a fixed opening at the center of the roof, was often a compromise between smoke release and heat retention. Because the lodge was so massive, the internal convection currents were strong, pulling the smoke upward. The greatest heat loss was through this hole, so in the deepest cold, the fire was managed to burn low and clean, minimizing the need for massive smoke egress. When the lodge was left unattended for brief periods, the smoke hole might even be temporarily covered with a simple hide or mat to lock in maximum warmth the entryway and storage alcoves. The entrance to the Earth Lodge was often a short, low tunnel, sometimes angled, creating the same cold trap effect as the igloo. But the structure also incorporated subterranean storage pits dug into the floor beneath the beds or along the perimeter. These pits, used to store dried corn, squash, and pemmican, leveraged the stable geothermal temperature of the earth to keep the food dry and protected from freezing, integrating food preservation directly into the architectural design. The Earth Lodge was thus a complete survival system: shelter, heat source, and refrigerator, all in one structure. The fire-starting ceremony igniting survival. No matter how ingenious the shelter, its function depended entirely on the ability to generate a fire. And in the freezing cold, fire starting became a life-or-death skill, often wrapped in ceremony and shared vigilance. The fire kit and preservation. The fire kit was sacred. It consisted of a bow drill, a spindle, a hearthboard, and carefully prepared tinder, often dried cedar bark, fungus, or finely shredded inner bark. The key to winter fire was keeping the kit absolutely dry. The components were stored in a dedicated sealed rawhide pouch, often carried close to the body or hung near the warmest part of the shelter to ensure the tinder never absorbed moisture from the air. the ceremonial flame. Starting the fire was often a ritualistic act. The first successful ember, achieved through intense friction, was treated as a spark of the Creator, a gift of life. This ember was gently transferred to the tinder and coaxed into flame. Once established, the fire was rarely allowed to go completely out during the deepest winter months. It was banked carefully, covered with ash and a few slow-burning logs, to preserve the hot coals overnight. Tending the fire to ensure the embers survived until morning was a constant duty, a non-stop act of survival that saved precious time and energy from having to restart the arduous process. Fire for tools, the hardeners. The fire was also a tool for architecture and survival gear. Wooden digging sticks, used to pry roots or clear snow, were often hardened by holding their tips in the fire until the wood was charred and rigid. This process significantly increased the tool's durability and effectiveness in breaking frozen ground or clearing ice, showing that the fire's utility extended far beyond simple heat and cooking. The language of the poles, teepee assembly and signaling. The lodgepole pines that formed the teepee's frame were a language in themselves, critical for both structural integrity and communal safety. The three-pole foundation, planes. The construction of the teepee began with a precise three-pole tripod foundation. 3 poles were tied together near the top, raised as a unit, and then spread apart to form the primary rigid base. All subsequent poles, often 17-20 in total, were then placed against this foundation, ensuring a near-perfect conical structure. This 3-pole method was faster and more stable than building a 4-pole base, a key innovation for a nomadic people needing to establish shelter rapidly in harsh conditions. Poles as signposts, the apex flag. The very top of the teepee poles where they converged often served as a subtle communication point. A community arriving at a site might leave their poles standing with a small piece of cloth or hide attached, signaling to others their identity, their intentions, or the direction of the hunt. In the winter landscape, where vision was often obscured by snow or distance, the height of the teepee poles acted as a vital signpost for travelers returning to the camp. The travois pole dual use. As mentioned, the pole's dual function as the travois drag sled framework was a massive efficiency gain. This meant that the poles, the heaviest part of the shelter, always justified their weight, serving as both the house skeleton and the primary mode of transportation for the entire household's goods. The architecture itself was perfectly integrated into the nomadic logistics of the tribes. The ultimate test, shelter in extremis. The true testament to the ingenious nature of these shelters was their performance during extremis, the sudden, non-negotiable emergencies of a plains blizzard or an Arctic whiteout, the blizzard defense, teepee. When a blizzard hit, the Lakota inside the teepee would often reinforce the interior by placing extra poles against the walls and securing the inner liner tighter. The snow banking at the base, which they had carefully packed or allowed to accumulate, became a solid, non-conductive wall of ice and air, sealing the lower perimeter. The cone's shedding ability ensured the roof did not collapse. The interior, though noisy from the whipping hides, remained structurally sound and warm. The shelter held the whiteout defense, igloo, snow cave. In the Arctic, when a whiteout made travel suicidal, the igloo, or a rapidly dug snow cave, was the last line of defense. The air within these structures, even with minimal lighting from a seal oil lamp, quickly rose to survivable temperatures. The snow's perfect insulation meant that once the entrance was sealed with a block of snow, the occupants were protected from the wind chill entirely, relying solely on their own body heat and the small lamp to maintain equilibrium. The ingenuity lay in the speed and simplicity of the structure, a survival tool that could be erected in minutes using the very medium that threatened them. The Hogan's unshakable, calm the Hogan. Once sealed, represented unshakable calm. The sheer mass of the earth meant that the loudest wind could be reduced to a distant whisper. In the face of danger, this silence was a psychological anchor, a final proof that the shelter's strength was not just physical, but mental, allowing the family inside to conserve their energy and spirit, waiting patiently for the storm to pass. The Native American winter shelter was not merely built to survive the cold, it was built to outlast the cold, a permanent architectural record of ancestral wisdom and an enduring symbol of human life's profound and resilient connection to the earth. The final echo, shelter as a source of pride, the final layer of these ingenious shelters was the cultural pride imbued in their construction, a feeling that fueled the intensive labor required to build and maintain them. These, woman's signature A, well-constructed teepee or wigwam, was a source of immense pride and standing for the woman who built and maintained it. Her skill in tanning the hides, choosing the saplings, managing the fire, and maintaining the clean air was directly linked to the health and comfort of her family. Her work was the central, non-negotiable component of winter survival, and the quality of her home was her public testament to her strength. The shared labor of the lodge, the construction of large shelters, like the Earth Lodge or the Longhouse, was a massive communal effort involving shared feasts and ceremony. This shared labor ensured that the final structure was not just a home, but a symbol of collective strength, forging bonds that would hold the community together when the winter tried to pull them apart. The ingenuity of Native American winter shelters remains a profound and living testament to a people who mastered their environment by understanding its deepest secrets. They built homes that were perfect, sustainable machines for life, proving that the best technology is often that which works in resilient harmony with nature. The subtlety of ground heating beyond the stones. We delved deeper into the nuanced ways the ground was not just insulated, but actively utilized as a subtle heat management system within the most effective shelters. The principle was to moderate the temperature, avoiding extremes that could shock the system. The earth as a radiator. Hogan. In the Hogan, the earth floor itself was the radiator. After the central fire had burned for hours, the surrounding earth would absorb and stabilize the temperature. The occupants often sat or worked on woven mats directly on the earth floor, benefiting from this gentle, stable warmth. This was a continuous, low-intensity heat source that minimized the need for constant fire maintenance. A simple geological form of underfloor heating, the snow mound stove, Arctic North. In some northern temporary shelters, a small secondary mound of snow was built inside the shelter but kept separate from the sleeping platform. A fire was never built directly on it. Instead, heated stones from an external fire were placed on the mound, and the heat was allowed to slowly radiate. The snow beneath the stones acted as a form of insulation, concentrating the heat upward into the air, rather than allowing it to leach quickly into the ground. This clever technique used the surrounding environment to enhance the efficiency of the heat source. The daily floor maintenance, planes. The daily inspection of the teepee floor was critical for health. If a portion of the floor, the willow mats or the grass layer, became wet from a spill or condensation, that section was immediately marked, removed, or fluffed vigorously and moved to the edge of the fire's radiant heat to dry. Allowing dampness to remain in the bedding or floor was seen as a grave threat, as evaporative cooling could quickly chill the occupant, making this obsessive moisture control a non-negotiable architectural responsibility. The art of thaw management. Seasonal architecture. The end of winter brought a new set of architectural challenges, the spring thaw and the accompanying dampness, mud and water, which could be nearly as lethal as the deep cold. Native American shelters were designed with foresight to manage this transitional period. The teepee's lifting skirt, as the snow melted and the ground became saturated, the teepee's outer hides and inner liner were often subtly lifted or rolled up a few inches from the ground. This was done to prevent the hides from wicking up ground moisture, which would ruin the hide and promote mold. The lifting of the base allowed air to circulate underneath, helping the ground dry faster and reducing the humidity inside the lodge. a dynamic architectural adjustment to the rising water table. Wigwam drainage channels. Around semi-permanent wigwams in the Northeast, communities often dug simple drainage channels into the earth before winter. As the spring thaw began, these channels directed meltwater away from the wigwam's base, preventing the floor from becoming saturated and protecting the precious stored resources, like dried corn and nuts, in underground caches from being flooded. This low-tech water management was vital for protecting the food supply during the most unstable time of the year, the Hogan's elevated hearth. In the permanent Hogan, the central fire pit was often slightly elevated or lined with stone to prevent the dampness of the earth from infiltrating the hearth. Keeping the fire pit dry was essential, as wet earth would cool the fire, increase smoke, and compromise the quality of the indoor air. The communal construction ceremony, weaving social fabric. The construction process itself was deeply woven into the tribe's social and spiritual fabric, ensuring that the shelter was imbued with communal purpose and protection. The longhouse raising, Iroquois. The building of a longhouse was a major community event, often taking days of coordinated effort. The sheer size required the labor of many families, turning the raising of the massive timber frame into a collective ceremony. Success meant safety for everyone, reinforcing the tribe's political and social unity through the literal act of construction, the teepee raising ceremony. Even the nomadic teepee raising had ceremonial aspects. The 3 foundation poles were often selected and erected with specific prayers, dedicating the structure to the safety of the family. The communal effort involved women working together, teaching the younger generation the intricate skills of lashing and stitching, making the construction site a powerful school of architecture, botany, and social cooperation. The final act of sealing. Once a permanent shelter like the Hogan was completed, the final act of sealing the door and lighting the first fire was a ritual. The lighting of the fire, often done by a spiritual leader, was an act of bringing the warmth of the cosmos into the new home, ensuring the dwelling was not just a pile of materials, but a spiritually protected space. The entire architectural process, from harvesting the wood to lighting the final fire, was an integrated act of spiritual engineering focused on generating luck, stability, and enduring life. The sensory experience of safety, the true measure of the shelter's ingenuity, was the sensory experience it created, a profound feeling of safety that acted as the ultimate psychological medicine against the cold. The sound of silence. Hogan Earth Lodge. The Hogan's thick earth walls absorbed the sounds of the external world. The wind's roar was muffled to a low hum, the noise of external movement muted. This silence, in the face of a terrifying blizzard, was immensely comforting, allowing the occupants to conserve psychological energy and sleep soundly. The scent of home. Teepee wigwam. The interior of the teepee or wigwam had a specific, comforting scent, a mixture of dried cedar or sage smoke, tanned buffalo hide, and the aroma of simmering bone broth. This familiar scent profile was an immediate sensory cue for safety, deeply associated with the absence of danger and the presence of warmth and food. The very air they breathed was a psychological anchor. The warm glow of the center, the central fire, shielded from drafts, provided a steady, warm, flickering glow that pushed back the absolute darkness of the long winter night. This light was a continuous visual affirmation of life, stability, and control, essential for warding off the mental fatigue and despair that the cold and isolation could bring. The shelter was engineered to be a sanctuary for the senses, ensuring that the inhabitants felt perpetually secure, allowing them to thrive and not just survive. The timeless blueprint. The ingenious winter shelters of Native Americans are not relics. They are a timeless blueprint for sustainable, resilient, and human-centric design. They teach us that true ingenuity comes not from expensive, complex technology, but from deep observation of the environment and respectful cooperation with natural materials. The simplicity of their solutions, the air gap, the earth mass, the snow block, holds greater wisdom than many of our modern, resource-intensive housing strategies. Their architecture was a dynamic covenant with the land, ensuring survival for the individual, resilience for the community, and sustainability for all future generations.